Town Hall. We are in our fifth Racial Justice Town Hall. That is 5 out of 23 years of the Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit. Welcome all. We are so glad you're here. We're going to give folks a chance to come in before I do a formal introduction, but I see the number is increasing quickly. This is a good conversation, y'all. Everybody's concerned about policing in schools, policing in our communities, abolition. So we're going to get started. Good evening. So for tonight's town hall, we do have deaf interpreters, deaf and hearing interpreter teams for accessibility. This is the best access practice to make sure that the spectrum of American Sign Language users have equal access to information. Deaf interpreters are native and fluent ASL users, able to provide interpretation in an innate and accessible form. Tonight we have deaf interpreters April Jackson Woodard, and then we also have Topher Gonzalez Avila, and they will be visible throughout this event, providing ASL interpretation, along with their hearing interpreter team, Charity Keski, I believe, and Debbie Kadiyama. Thank you. And my name is Yvette Shipman, also known as Yve. I am the treasurer, the co-chair of the town hall, and a planning committee member of PRJS for the last, 5 or so years. So thank you tonight for joining us. And we wish to begin this evening with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the stolen land of the Lenape, Munsee, Susquehannock, Shawnee, Iroquois, and many more known and unnamed, which we now call Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This land was founded upon the erasures and exploitation of many non-European people. It's our duty to protect and honor the history and people of these places. We also pay respect to the Black, Indigenous people of color who were stolen from their land in Africa and brought to the Indian subcontinent, North America, South America, the Caribbean islands, the Middle East, and throughout the world. We acknowledge the suffering endured from the cruelty of the horrible institution of genocide, slavery, racism, segregation, and the continued oppression of Black and Brown people throughout the world. Together, we acknowledge the memory of our ancestors.
Thank you for that, Yvette. My name is Gada Makushi. I am co-chair of the Town Hall and a planning committee member of the Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit. The Racial Justice Town Hall, which grew out of the summit and is now in its 5th year, was started to create a space for dialogue between leaders and community members around issues directly affecting our community. This year, the topics our panelists are discussing are about school policing and prison abolition. There will be a 5-minute break between the two panels at about 7:15. If at any time you have questions for the panel or specific panelists, please place them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. I will begin by introducing the topic of school policing. It is fair to say that while the role of police in our schools is not a new topic, the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis had an impact not just on the role of policing in general, but also specifically about school policing and the role of police in schools. This tragic event pushed the conversation around school policing on a much wider scale across the nation. School districts across the country now seem more willing to revisit this topic. Within Allegheny County, and specifically within Pittsburgh Public Schools, which is the largest school district in this part of the state, this conversation around the role of police in schools is very timely. To provide some context to the conversation we will be having, a recent report released by the Black Girls Equity Alliance with 2019 data revealed that Black youth are arrested at 10 times the rate of white youth in Pittsburgh, while nationally, Black youth are arrested at about 3 times the rate of white youth. Additionally, 51% of all youth arrests in Pittsburgh were made by Pittsburgh Public School police officers. With regard to police, I think it's important to note that Pittsburgh Public Schools employs its own school police officers, but also has a relationship with the Pittsburgh City Police that would be guided in some part by the Memorandum of Understanding between PPS and City Police, if they had one in effect. State law mandates all school districts have an MOU, and PPS has unfortunately been out of compliance with this requirement for over a decade. And with that, I will introduce our panelists for the evening. First is Dr. Claire Cohen. She is a Black child and adolescent psychiatrist who has been a community activist in Pittsburgh for over 30 years. Currently, her 2 areas of focus are educational justice and Medicare for all. Auja is the Chief of Communications and Outreach within Black, Young, and Educated. She is a Pittsburgh Kappa alumni and a youth activist. She has experience working with organizations such as One Hood, One's Girls, and others. Harold Jordan is a senior policy advocate with the ACLU of Pennsylvania. He is the author of Beyond Zero Tolerance, Discipline and Policing in Pennsylvania Schools, co-author of Cops and No Counselors, How the Lack of School Mental Health Staff is Harming Students, and the editor of Know Your Rights, a handbook for public school students in Pennsylvania. He is also one of the leading experts on all things to do with school policing policies and legislation within Pennsylvania, and the creator of the website End Zero Tolerance. Dr. Anthony Hamlin is the current superintendent of Pittsburgh Public Schools. He comes to the district from Palm Beach County, Florida, where his career as an educator began with his work as a case manager and behavioral specialist with a county mental health unit. From there, he held positions of teacher, dean of students, assistant principal, and district administrator. And last but not least, Heather Hobson is our moderator tonight. She is the founder and creative director of Motormouth Multimedia, a communications and marketing firm made up of a collective of creatives and consultants of color. Using more than a decade of television news reporting experience, Heather assembles teams to tell diverse stories, provide unique perspectives, and increase the visibility of important issues for clients. So without further ado, I will pass this on to Heather, who will get us started with our school policing panel.
Thank you, Gada, and thank you, Yvette, and all the panelists who took time out of your day, because I know if you're like me, you probably spent all day on Zoom. And most importantly, thank you to those who are logging on. We know that you're juggling working at home, juggling distance learning with your children. But this just shows, when we look to see, we have almost 200 people who showed up tonight, how important this issue is. So first, I want to start out with a little housekeeping. Remember, drop things into the chat. We want to share, we want to collaborate, we want to come up with solutions to the issues that are being elevated in tonight's conversation. We don't want to point blame, but rather want to figure out ways that we can work together. So please utilize the chat feature. And if you have questions, drop those in the Q&A, because we don't want them to get lost. And remember that, you know, we might not all agree, we might not all see things the same, but what we can agree on is that we care about the students. So the first question, and those who are watching along, we want this to be interactive. So be sure to drop your answers to some of the questions into the chat as well. What should the role of police in schools be, or should there even be a role? Because as we see with our neighbors at Woodland Hills, they phased out police officers. So I will start first with Harold Jordan, because that's who I see on the screen.
Mr. Jordan, before you start, I need to ask the panelists, because I am watching the chat. I want to correct one thing. We do not have a chat. You can put your questions in the Q&A. The chat is not live.
Oh,
the second thing is our interpreters needs everybody to slow down just a little bit so that they can provide the service in the way that they need to. Okay. Sorry for interrupting. I know not everyone is looking at the chat, so let's slow down a little bit.
Sorry, that's the ad-libbing reporter coming out when I see chat messages coming across. So utilize the Q&A, drop your questions in the Q&A. What is the role, and is there a role of police officers in schools? Harold, we'll start with you.
Good evening. I'm really happy to join folks to talk about important issues of racial justice, which in my mind are really about fair treatment and equitable distribution of resources. Those are some of the key things that we think about and talk about when we talk about racial justice. And in this context, I would say that I don't believe that schools should have standing police forces. I think the police should have a very limited role being called in only the most serious and dangerous situations. And that the kinds of resources that are committed to schools should be adults and other kinds of community support resources that can work with young people and work with those communities. But I'm a critic of this notion that the police are there by default in schools, and believe that their role should be extremely limited to being called in to only the most dangerous situations. Any other use of police in schools, I think, is excessive.
Okay, and we can just jump in. It can be a conversation, interactive. Make sure you guys drop your questions in as well so we can pull you into the chat.
Hi, I'm Auja, by the way. I'm glad to be on this panel. Thank you for having me here. I agree, Mr. Harold. I believe that police in schools would be excessive. I honestly believe that even with security guards, their privileges should be limited as well. It just seems like an excessive thing to have within schools. And I feel like once we have police in schools, it'll be excessive on the students as well. I feel like Black youth are already policed on in life. And I feel like, I don't know, they'll be discriminated against, based on my experiences within being a captain, within going to youth prep and whatnot. I feel like having a police there, they'll abuse their privileges. And I think they would just intimidate students as well. So that's just my stance on that situation.
Okay. I can see, I also do not believe that police should be standing regularly scheduled in schools, and for a number of reasons. Some of them have already been mentioned, but I also want to point out that for many kids, school is the closest place to home. And for kids who have troubled homes, school can be their sanctuary. And there have been a number of studies that have shown that while the adults, the staff, and the teachers feel safer with police in schools, many children, especially children of color, do not feel safer. They feel intimidated. They feel threatened. I also have the concern that having the police there seems to increase the chances that police will be called for what I call normal problematic behavior of children. And those behaviors will then it increases the chances that those normal problematic behaviors are criminalized. Also, there are a number of instances in schools around the nations where children have been, some of whom have already been traumatized, have been further traumatized by the way police handle. Police do not have training in child development. They do not have training in de-escalations. They do not have training in mental health. So they frequently respond inappropriately to those things. Children who are troubled, who have mental health issues, developmental issues, and have been victims of trauma, frequently have behavior which police find very difficult to deal with. Children who are stressed and having problems are frequently aggressive, are frequently oppositional, are frequently difficult for adults to deal with. And when there are police there, the temptation to call them rather than to take the measures to really seriously deal with problems, the issues of an acting out job in a complex way that it deserves to be dealt with, often don't occur. The temptation is to call the police, and then the police can come in and make things worse, not better. So that is my feeling, and that is why I have a strong feeling. I can give some examples, and maybe further on I will, of times when police came in and made the situation worse and even caused trauma to a child who was already suffering from stress or trauma.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hamlet, if you can weigh in, you're in the hot seat. If you can weigh in from the district's perspective of, what is the role of police in schools?
So first and foremost, before I start, I want to thank the Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit for organizing this evening's panel and inviting me to participate. Oftentimes, and too many times, the district is a topic of discussion where we are not invited to the table. So I truly appreciate the opportunity to be a part of tonight's town hall, as addressing systemic racial iniquities in Pittsburgh public schools will take the collective work of all of us. The safety of our students, our faculty and staff is of the utmost importance to the administration and also to our board as well. Our school police play a vital role, we would say, in ensuring students and staff feel free while in our facilities. They work closely and collaboratively with school leaders, local emergency responders, and community agencies to quickly respond to school safety concerns. For the most part, these safety concerns occur outside of our facilities, and our officers work to prevent outside issues from impacting the learning environments within our schools. So the primary reason for school police is ensuring the safety of our students and faculty and staff. We definitely acknowledge that there is a need to remedy the systemic iniquities by changing policies and practices that lead to student involvement in the criminal justice system, which is disproportionately higher for our African-American students. And yes, I'm at the district, but we respect everybody's opinion. We're highly collaborative at Pittsburgh Public Schools. We're have a number of initiatives in place to make sure we reduce these inequities that exist in our system to better support our Black and brown students in Pittsburgh Public Schools.
Thank you. And I see we have some questions filling up in the chat, but before we go there, wanted to hear from Auja, because you are a former PPS student, you recently graduated, you're very active and vocal. So what do you think from the students' perspective about the police presence in school, especially at a time when you turn on the TV, it's unfortunate there are stories about police brutality occurring to Black and brown children across the US and including right here in our backyard?
From my experience, I've been to PPS schools my entire 12 years of living. I think that the students definitely do not want police to be in our schools. Mostly our Black students express that as well. On a day-to-day basis, we feel intimidated by even our teachers, who don't even who criminalize our actions for normal problematic behaviors. And we were vocal about that as well. And when people have different mindsets, things don't go off the way they should be. But I'm chilly right now, I'm sorry. But I'm just, from a student's point of view, it's very uncomfortable when you have this adult man or a woman restraining a minor for just being a normal teenager, and even if those students outside the facilities fight or get into some type of altercation, the use of restraint, it's we're being restrained as adults rather than being children. Like it was said, most police officers, most security guards are not even trained on how to de-escalate a child's behavior. Most of them are not even trained on how to handle a child whenever altercations occur. And it's quite frustrating when we're not being listened to, or we're not, not being heard. And school is a home away from home. I always thought of school being, you know, a home away from my home. So when I come to school and I see an adult hurting my friends or like not treating me the way I should be as a child, it's quite intimidating and it's quite troubling to me. So that's just my stance on that.
Okay, so Dr. Cohen, when Auja says it's quite troubling to her, what impact, and is there an impact of policing in schools? And is there an alternative? Some people say we can't just remove police from schools. What is the impact and what is the alternative? And if Dr. Cohen can start out.
Yeah, so there are a couple large studies, one in California, one in Maryland, and then some other studies, which looked at how students and staff and school teachers and adult staff feel about police in school. And it's interesting to see that almost exclusively the adult staff feel safer with police in schools, but a significant proportion of children and majority of kids of both African-American and Latinx kids actually feel less safe, some overlapping reasons and some different reasons. One of the reasons is that a lot of kids of color have had bad experiences outside with police or have had family members have bad experiences. So that leads them to, when you've had a bad experience with a group of people, you tend to be hyper vigilant. You tend to feel keyed up and triggered when you see someone who represents that same person. So for a lot of kids of color, that's an issue. A lot of Latinx kids have had bad experiences because of the whole immigration issue. And there are definitely studies that show that when kids feel that kind of stress, it makes it harder for them to pay attention in school and in their classes. Their grades, particularly in math, tend to suffer, and they tend to like to come to school less. And there tend to be more behavior problems. So I think that while it may make adults feel safer, it tends to make kids, and some kids, granted, some kids do feel safer. It's this interesting racial difference, but even a significant number of white kids don't feel safe, but definitely more kids of color do not feel safe. And there are ways that you can make kids feel safe without having police in schools. There are a lot of things that we don't look at in terms of addressing some of the issues for children in schools that could make kids feel, I mean, one is training for all staff and how to de-escalate. One is having teams in the school whose main role is to help with de-escalation when children are feeling, when a child is out of control emotionally. Another is in Baltimore in 2 schools, and I'll be quick, I don't want to take over. They had this interesting program where they implemented meditation and yoga in the morning every day in schools. Their attendance went up dramatically. The rate of kids not coming to school. Kids were flocking to school because it helped. They felt so settled and so calmed that they liked that feeling, and they came to school regularly. And there's a multitude of other things you can do to deal with children who are having problematic behaviors, and sometimes behaviors that could possibly harm others, other than having police stationed in the schools.
Right. So Harold, what, if there are these disproportionate rates and this impact on students, what are the alternatives?
So first you have to look at whether having police in schools works in terms of its stated purpose, and that is to reduce serious incidents of student crime. And the research here tends to lean on the side of saying no, that student crime is not reduced substantially by police being in schools. In some cases, it may go up in some situations, but the bulk of the research does not show that it reduces crime in schools against young people. And so that's a starting point. And then the next thing to do is to look at whether it has negative impacts. And we know that it has negative impacts in terms of higher arrest rates, substantial higher arrest rates, especially for Black youth. And this is of great concern in Pittsburgh, where the arrest rates are even greater than in most other similarly sized districts and communities. And then finally, it's like, what kind of message does it send to schools and members of the school community about how folks come together and resolve issues and create better and more peaceful schools? So it seems to be, at a minimum, you certainly have to attack things that lead to higher rates of arrest, higher rates of citation, to find out, for example, why such a large number of the arrests are for things like disorderly conduct, failure to disperse, and things like that, which are not which are not seriously violent crimes, and to place resources in the schools to be able to work with young people and improve the climate of the entire school for everybody. So that's one thing. Second thing is, I would suggest that school districts declare a moratorium on permitting school police officers to hand kids tickets and citations. So these are sort of alternatives to arrest, but there are tickets and citations for the most minor kinds of things, disruption, things of that sort. And what happens is that it places a young person into the adult justice system where they're not represented by public defenders. Kids often get fines and fees and create records that can follow a kid years later into their lives and maybe have an impact on future opportunities. And so we're very alarmed. I'm very alarmed by looking at the numbers of summary citations and tickets that are handed to children. So you need to put a stop to that. You need to take affirmative measures to reduce arrests, especially in these categories such as disruption and disorderly conduct. Those are some of the main things that I think need to be done. And then finally, reinvest the resources that you put into police into other kinds of student support services. We know, as I said in the beginning, that racial justice, achieving racial justice, is in part about fair treatment, but it's also partly about equitable distribution of resources. And what young people are demanding more than anything else is that more resources be placed into schools, that the adults that work with young people in schools not be law enforcement oriented, but be support resources.
And so, Dr. Hamlet, that's a good transition for you to talk about what are those resources. You just recently renewed your contract, and what is the plan to I guess, increase resources and decrease policing?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Heather. And I definitely appreciate Mr. Jordan's comments as well. Understanding that this arrest and citation and out-of-school suspension and school-to-prison pipeline is the utmost importance to Pittsburgh Public Schools. So we have been intentional, I think, in our efforts to eliminate racial disparities in the achievement of our African-American students, as outlined in our On Track to Equity plan, our most extensive and comprehensive equity plan to date. We strive every day to better understand the sources and causes of inequitable juvenile justice engagements. While suspensions and school arrests have decreased under my administration, we can and must do better to protect Black children in Pittsburgh. When we examine the alarming truths found in the Black Girls Equity Alliance report about the systemic iniquities affecting Black youth in our region, we knew we needed a thorough data analysis to help us better understand the sources and causes of inequitable juvenile justice engagements. I support and will ever support the board's resolution to reimagine school safety, and the staff and community will work to develop recommendations for that. In addition, in September, our board approved a contract with RMC Research Corporation to conduct an independent third-party analysis of current police data and police calls for service, arrests, and citations. We take ownership and responsibility for this data. We are not hiding it, we are calling it out ourselves. And we are not running away from it. We are dedicated to changing it. We definitely must eliminate in an expeditious manner the school to prison pipeline, because one student engaged with juvenile justice system is one too many. And as far as the MOU, we can only call the city police for emergencies and jurisdictional issues, such as events off of our property. And one thing I want to note as well is that when we talk about this, the focus for us is what are those mitigating factors? What are those systemic iniquities that are in place, meaning structural and also societal and also organizational wise that are impacting our students and making them have these negative engagements with our armed police officers, our school police officers. And so we want to make sure we begin to look at those situations as well and get to the root cause of the matter of the arrest, of the citations, and of the out of school suspensions. So thank you. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah. Thank you. And as we mentioned in the beginning of the chat, the success stories that come out of Woodland Hills, is there anything that Pittsburgh Public Schools is learning from the neighboring districts, not depending so much on police, but rather depending on some restorative justice things, the strategies that they're implementing?
Yeah, right now we're implementing various strategies as well, restorative practice, positive behavior interventions and supports, those things. But we need to double down on those and understanding that implementation is a march toward making sure that they have distinguished implementation in those schools. And some schools are at different levels. And so we have to provide support from the district level to make sure they double down on their restorative practices work with their students, and also the PBIS as well. And just put this into context, if I recall, Woodland Hills had one school police officer, and I wouldn't say it was a school police officer. We have actually school police officers that work for Pittsburgh Public Schools, and Woodland Hills contracted out with their local agency for one police officer. And so it's a different take on it. Not that we can't, and we will take notes from any and all school districts who are doing this work with our students and having positive effects. So we definitely will look at that. One of the things we're looking at as well is the diversion program in Philadelphia schools as well, which seems to be working well and has promising positive data.
Right. And when you brought up Philadelphia schools, a lot of people ask questions about Philly because it's a much larger district. Pittsburgh Public Schools is 5 times smaller, but yet it arrests more than 1.5 times the number of students. So how do those numbers, because a lot of folks in the community for months, this isn't the first time this question has come up, want to know, why such the stark differences if Philly, that is a larger district that has what some may consider to be even larger societal problems, how are they able to arrest less students?
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, can I jump in a minute? So there's a couple of things I would say here now that, in my view, the high arrest rates in Pittsburgh for especially African-American youth is both driven by school district arrests and as a reflection of the way that Pittsburgh City Police deal with African-American youth. So not only do you have high arrest rates in the schools compared to other parts of the state, you actually have higher juvenile justice system involvement of Black youth even outside of schools. And so in that sense, Pittsburgh is even more of an outlier than Philadelphia in terms of the rates of juvenile justice system involvements of Black youth, whether it's in the schools or outside of the schools. So when we focus on the relationship between the school district, its own police department, and the city police department, we need to keep in mind that that the numbers you're seeing in schools are a reflection of the numbers you're seeing for Black youth in the city of Pittsburgh. So there is a broader problem of policing in Pittsburgh. What goes on in the school district is one manifestation and one driver of that, not the complete problem. And in that sense, I think that there's been more of an effort in Philadelphia to sort of reduce juvenile justice system involvement of young people generally, both in schools and outside of schools, because we have a large kind of juvenile justice advocacy community that has been pushing both the city and the school district in that direction. And yes, there are alternatives to arrest. There are situations in which you can say this kid should not be arrested for this. And that's sort of the thinking behind the Philadelphia program. But, you know, I would say that while I support such efforts, I don't think the decisions should always be placed in the hands of the police, that they can decide to be charitable in one situation and decide to be hard on a young person in another. That's the wrong emphasis, that the educators in charge of the district need to take a stance here about what is and what is not an appropriate use of the justice system. And so it should not be something where the police can decide, have all of the discretion as to how they deal with young people.
Thank you, Harold. And I want to correct one stat. So I may have had a previous stat. My text messages are going off. People are correcting me. Pittsburgh schools apparently they have a arrest rate of 8 times the rate of the Philadelphia school district. So just wanted to point that out. And we will give Dr. Hamlet a chance to respond. But first, let's let Dr. Cohen weigh in.
Yeah. So I want to pull back further than even what the school does to divert arrest. I think we need to be thinking about children who are coming into school with problematic behavior. How do we assess that behavior and how do we respond to it? What are the things behind these behaviors? And I'm probably, because I'm a psychiatrist, I see this. I see both children of color and children with special needs being overly treated by the police. Mm-hmm. But I also see that many times, many of the issues that these children bring to school are not being addressed. And what's happening is people turn around and they want to call the police because a kid is having problems. So we have lots of kids who may not have enough food, kids who may have problems with housing, kids who may be subjected to domestic violence, which causes PTSD and causes kids oftentimes to come to school angry and in a hypervigilant mood where their adrenal system is overstimulated and they're ready to fight or flight at the drop of a hat. We have kids who may developmentally have problems with dysregulation. And I think one of the things we need to do is be thinking about who are those kids? What are those kids? How do we recognize them? Sometimes the teacher's not aware. Sometimes counselors aren't aware. How do we, without stigmatizing those kids, flag those kids as people who need some extra support, some extra help to function appropriately in the school system? Then it's not a matter of how to divert from going to the police, but it's a matter of addressing the issues, the concerns, before you get to the point where you're talking about needing some more. In fact, I want to just say something. It's clear, and the psychological literature going decades back, it's clear that punitive approach is the worst, not the best approach. Approaches that address, that are trauma-informed, approaches that teach, and school's supposed to be about teaching, so teaching emotional regulation, emotional intelligence, and I know that the school is doing some of that. Approaches, those are the better approaches than approaches to just are geared to just punishing, because punishment doesn't teach anything. And a lot of times for a kid who's distressed and who's in a difficult spot, punishment just makes the kid angrier and just ramps up their amygdala in their brain and their adrenal system, their autonomic nervous system more. So we need to be thinking, we need to step back even further and think about, we have a lot of kids, and we're going to have this after COVID, because I'm seeing this with my patients. We're going to have a lot of kids coming back to school really, really stressed. How do we, knowing that children when stressed tend to have behavior problems and learning problems, what are we going to do to address those in a proactive way before we get to the point where we're thinking about taking some kind of punitive action, which may include calling law enforcement?
And Dr. Hamlin, I mean, the Q&A box is starting to fill up, and a lot of people are asking the same types of questions. We've been having these conversations for months, perhaps years, and some people just want to know, bottom line, will you remove police officers from Pittsburgh Public Schools? Is that an option? Because that's where a lot of people want to have a conversation that goes in the direction of restorative practices, and the data backs it up. So, I want to ask in the utmost respect in an unbiased way, but folks just want to know, are you removing police from schools in this next school year?
Right now, we have a plan. The board passed a resolution to work to reimagine school safety in Pittsburgh Public Schools. And so with that, out of that comes recommendations that we'll look at as a board, and understanding that that particular committee is about giving recommendations. And I agree with Dr. Cohen and Mr. Jordan wholeheartedly on both sides of that, making sure that we understand what's going on with our children when they come to our schools, how their home life are affecting them, and when they come to school, what type of supports do they need in school, but also what type of supports can we dispatch to their homes and communities as well, because understanding that the student comes, if they have a healthy family, the student will come with a healthy attitude as well. And so in some form or fashion, we have to begin to work with the families and the communities to make sure the supports are surrounded and they're saturated for our students in our community as well. And one of the things I like to talk about as well is this system. And when you think about public education really hasn't changed in years when you look at it. We've got some technology, we got some whiteboards instead of chalkboards, things of that nature. But we have some systemic issues that are affecting our communities, infecting the mental health of our students and our parents as well. And how has the funding system changed to support these needs that are in our schools? And so for me, I look at the policy of that, begin to attack that as well, and making sure that we advocate for funding that we need to really, truly have these new world supports for our students, or this 21st century supports for our students, our faculty and staff, and our community members as well.
And so, Dr. Hamlet, last week, I believe, and someone can probably drop the link of the actual PFT report, but they had several recommendations, but the primary two were implementing a diversion program and enhancing restorative practices throughout the district. So what is your position or thoughts on these recommendations? And a lot of folks may not necessarily, I think a lot of people are moving beyond recommendations and want solid actions that are being implemented. So I guess the question would be, what is your response to the PFT report?
Oh, my response is wholeheartedly positive with that. Those are things that we are looking at as well. That diversion program, which I mentioned earlier from Philadelphia, is one that has positive data, and one that we want to look to and begin to emulate and begin to put in Pittsburgh Public Schools as a result. And so restorative practices, that's part of our strategic plan. We want to make sure that we double down on that with support to our faculty and staff, having them understand that one person doesn't own restorative practices. It's a school approach. It's a cultural approach of restorative practice that's going to make the difference. That being said, all of our faculty and staff in our buildings, and also any individual that is going into our buildings. And I'm not just talking about teachers, not just talking about administrators, custodians, secretaries. Everybody needs to be immersed in this restorative practice mode in that school. And so we're doubling down on that, making sure we provide those supports, ongoing supports, so they can have those positive restorative practices within their schools.
Auja, how does this make you feel as a young person? I know that all young people are not monolithic. You can't speak for an entire district, but what sort of feelings and emotions are you having when you hear these conversations?
It's just like, I don't know, like we've been having conversations like this for decades, for years. Like, and it's just like Dr. Cohen said, like we need like even like what you said, we need action, like we need actual things to be done. And people are like tired of like recommending things and like being reprimanded for that. Like, we spoke up about the things that we didn't like within our schools. We tried to report the teachers and the principals and the people who like have abused their power on us, and like nothing, it's just like seems like nothing's being done about it. And I just want actual action, and I want people to be held accountable for the things that they've done. And I just like, I'm open to listening, and I'm open to, to talk about it. But what I want to see is action being done. I want to know, what are y'all going to do to protect these babies? What are you going to do to protect these children from being traumatized by the people who are abusing their power? What have you done for these girls out here who are being sexually harassed in schools and nothing's being done about it? What are you going to do about these disproportional rates within our school districts? Nothing has been done. We've been talking about it for decades. We've been talking about it for years. But it's just like, when's the action going to be? Like, when is it going to be done?
Mm-hmm.
When is, it's just like, I just like, it's like getting your hopes up. Like, it's just like, having a parent promising you to do something, but the parent never does it. Like, and that's just like, that's why there's so much like distrust between students and teachers, even with youth and adults. There's so much distrust because we're being promised, things will be done for us, but those things haven't, been sufficed. How many more years is it going to be? How much more do you need? How much time do you need for these things to come up? So it's just like, what are you going to do for these kids? And I already had my times of being in high school. I already had my degree. But what I'm worried about is for those kids who are younger than me, who feel hopeless, who feel like they're being discriminated against. What are y'all going to do for those kids?
Thank
That's
you.
what I'm worried about. Thank you.
And Dr. Hamlin, this is something that has gone on for decades. When I prepared for tonight's event, my father, one of his first jobs, and he's in his 70s, was working as a construction worker for the school district. And he said, "You're still trying to solve that problem?" Like this was, 50, 60 years ago. And we realized it occurred before you came. And I want to be mindful of time. I know there's lots of questions in the chat. And I think Gada is going to share elevate some of those questions. And some of those questions we hope, Dr. Hamlet, can be passed on to you, because a lot of people are really passionate and interested in engaging in not only a conversation, not only coming up with the list of recommendations, but actually working together on solutions. So hopefully we can send the questions that we don't get to my friends. I used to work in the communications and marketing department, to your team there. So several questions were about why we have police in schools and when that started, or when the increase occurred, and why it's being normalized. Why is it a normal thing? I remember when I went to school, obviously I didn't go to PPS, but we did have a security guard. He was pretty friendly. He wasn't armed. I don't even think we had metal detectors at the time. So why is it the normalization of policing kids?
So I'll chime in on that. I think again, this goes back many years. This has and I can't pinpoint the year that actual school police were actually put in place in Pittsburgh public schools. That's some research I can do and get back to the group, but they have been here for years. And again, not that that's saying anything moving forward. We want to make sure that we begin to address Auja's speaking about supporting our children. And that's what we need to get to. What type of support should our children need? But also, what type of training do we need to provide to our faculty and staff? Because we do know that there's some implicit bias amongst our faculty and staff, and it's not just with white teachers or administrators either. So we need to look at, all of us need to look at ourselves and make sure that we're having the right decisions around students, and not having biased opinions based on what you think of someone or what you think of that group of people, etc. We need to make sure that we're unbiased in our decision making and are making the right decisions to support our children, but also continuing to make sure that we push for the supports that are needed, that our children need in this day and age.
And someone asked about training, if people are uncomfortable being in the classroom. And I am a certified teacher, taught outside of DC. And the training really, I think what was more impactful was being in the classroom and interact with the students. And so the question is, you know, how do you support people who are feeling uncomfortable? And they had pointed out, Dr. Cohen, to answer this as well, as far as what do we do to support individuals who are uncomfortable?
Well, that's an excellent question. I don't know, I have all the answers, but I know I was reading some literature that showed that one of the things that is helpful, because you know, something like 80+% of the teachers in the United States are white, but the majority of children in public schools are Black. I mean, or people of color. I don't mean Black, or children of color, which is Black and brown and so on. So you have a very disparate picture set up already. And I know that there was one study at what they looked at. It says, you know, we all are human beings with different differences, different interests and different skills and different talents. So I know that there was one school, what they did was they took teachers and found out what were their interests, what were their talents, what were their skills, like one likes knitting, one plays chess. And then they did the same with students. And then they matched students, they buddied up students. So like if this student liked chess, they matched up with that teacher that had chess, or this student liked to knit, or so on. And they found that was one way, for example, I'm not saying this is the answer in all instances, to help to bridge some of that gap, because it started to humanize. One of the problems you have with in terms of race, almost every Black person knows a white person, but study after study shows that the majority of white people in the United States don't even know any Black people, don't even have exposure to them. So one of the things that particular study, that particular little project did in that school was it helped to bring out the humanity, because unfortunately too often whites don't see the humanity of our children. They don't see the humanity of Black people. So one of the things that helped, oh, we have some common interests. That's one thing. I think talking about it, I think doing more in-servicing can help. I think innovative programs that I think history, people, one of the things I'm a big proponent of is we have done a very poor job of teaching the true history of race in this country. So how many, Auja, did you learn about Red Summer in high school? No. How many even Black people don't know about Red Summer or Black Wall Street and what happened there? How many people know? I have Isabel Wilkerson. I started bringing this book. I work at the psychiatric hospital for kids to read, and I was surprised, Black and White, that was talking about the migration, the mass migration of Blacks from the South. And why were they doing that? To get away from the pogroms. We called it lynching. I call it pogroms because I want to make a point. How much of that history is known? So I think that those kind of things can be helpful in terms of bridging that gap and helping people to understand the complexity of our history and the trauma, the intergenerational trauma that Black people and brown people have been through in this country. And I just want to finish with saying one thing real quick. I had 2 children that went to Kappa. One graduated in 2018, one in 2016, Wesley and Winston. Auja may have heard of them. And they started a restorative justice program at Kappa, and Winston was invited to be involved in it. He was real excited. One of the things that bothered me was somehow it fell apart. They got all these kids together, and I think this may be one of the things Auja's talking about. They got all these kids together. They were all excited. They were going to do something. They were going to make something happen. And then they never called another meeting again. So that's one of the things we need to look at when we implement these programs in schools. What happens that they don't have follow through and they fall apart like this? Because it is, kids get real excited when they hear these things, and we need to find out what are the problems that cause these things to fall apart and not follow through. So
I know we have just a few more minutes. We're actually coming to you, Harold. I don't know if you want to comment or if you want to hear the question that was directed and tied into your comments. So Harold, someone wanted to know if you can talk a little bit about what can be done to reduce the arrest and reliance on police. And then someone else put something in the chat about the virtual policing that's taking place during remote learning. So I don't know if you can tie those answers.
So there are a couple of issues here, and this is actually what I wanted to say. Anyhow, I don't think we have to sit around and wait for a detailed analysis of the data to take some action. There's enough data about the district and about where arrests happen, who tends to be arrested and for what. That stuff is known. I've seen it. Okay, so I don't think we have to do that. I think, but I do think it is a problem if you say that in one school, we're going to have police and we're going to have a restorative justice program. I think everybody gets that that's not a school that's operating according to one kind of culture. And that the commitment that needs to be made is the commitment to say, let's have a robust restorative justice program that involves everybody in the school community, everybody who works and enters that school, and reduce policing as a part of that at the same time. And you could take 3 schools where, for example, where the rates of justice system involvement are greatest and make some gradual changes to shift the culture and the climate of the school away from a law enforcement focus into something else. But it takes a robust commitment to having some, kind of predominant way of working to improve school climate that doesn't rely on law enforcement to be able to move forward. And so that's what I think. What we have not seen, even in schools in Philadelphia, where you had both law enforcement response and some small restorative justice program. We have not seen those schools improve. What you have to do is to say we are committed as a school to at least one predominant way of improving school climate. So I think that there are gradual measures that can be taken in the short run while the data is studied a little bit more. But we know already what schools the arrests are great, what they're for, and who's arrested. So there is a base of information on which some kind of at least gradual action could be taken.
There's a comment that aligns perfectly with that. Someone said in the Q&A that as there's an increase of police presence, which is alarming, it demonstrates a shift closer and closer to the reality of the outside world, which we as Black kids notice is not loving, humanizing, or benefiting us. So thank you for sharing your youth voice. The person went on to say the adoption of a school police force highlights a larger theme of schools moving further and further away from being loving, learning environments, because there are some schools that are these loving, learning environments. My sister comes home, she really got me into to practice meditation and mindfulness. That has gotten us through COVID. So it is successful in some schools. And I want to be mindful of the time. We have another panel that's coming in after us. So we will take all the questions. I believe the organizers will take the questions from the chat and make sure that we continue the conversation via meetings. We have a little more time. Thank you, Gada, for giving us a few more minutes. And so does anybody have any final thoughts that they want to share or any points that weren't lifted up? And I'm going to, and while I have Auja maybe respond to that comment, I'm going to try to find some other questions within the Q&A.
I completely agree. I just feel like there's a lot of bias. Like, we already know which schools get policed, and we already know who already gets more arrested than others. So it's just like the facts are there. The truth is in the pudding. So it's just like the question is, when are the actions going to happen? I also think that there's a lot of bias within our schools as well, and we need more people coming through with their word on what actions to take within our with our students within our schools, and what's the next step to take as well. There's also a lot of things that go in with this, as well as sexual harassment, as well as mental health issues, as well as trauma. There's a lot of different problems that have yet to be tackled and a lot of our students get punished for, you know, reacting the way they react. And I think that a lot of people recognize children of color as adults rather than just children. And I think that there needs to be steps taken to prevent that, you know, just make that bias disappear, excuse me, but also just have more compassion for these kids and to be more understanding and to be willing to listen to us whenever we have a problem, be willing to listen to what we need to say. So those are just my thoughts.
I'm going to be a little biased and ask Robin's question. Is there an urgent plan of hiring Black teachers and incentive toward retention? This kind of hurts me because I am a certified teacher, tested well above Pennsylvania standards when I lived near DC, but yet I couldn't get a job here because I didn't have a degree, although I was certified. So if you can talk about that, is there a plan of hiring any teachers or incentives? Because there's always this conversation of increasing the number of African-American staff members.
Oh, great question. I can tell you that's one of our priorities in Pittsburgh Public Schools, is embedded in our first strategic plan when I arrived, to increase diversity in our workforce, but specifically in the area of instruction. Why? We have about 85 to 86% of our instructional staff, meaning teachers and those individuals that touch, I shouldn't say touch, use that in the wrong way, are with students, direct instruction with students on a regular basis. 85 to 86% of them are white. About 6% are African American, and the rest other. So it is a priority. And when you look at the makeup of our demographic of students, we are 54% African American in Pittsburgh Public Schools and 33% white, and the rest other. So we know we want to diversify our force, our teaching force, to make sure. What actions are we taking? We actually have a teacher magnet program at Brashear. And in my former life in Palm Beach County, at my the last school I was at, Palm Beach Lakes, we had a teaching magnet program as well. But the district went so far as to actually offer, when these students graduate from high school, and again, it was a highly diverse teaching magnet program. They actually offered these students a pre-contract binder for a job. So after 4 or 5 years, when you came back, we owed you a job. And so that's something that we're implementing in Pittsburgh Public Schools at their Brashear Magnet program as well. But also understanding that when we look at our demographics of our non-instructional staff, meaning paraprofessionals, it's about 60% African-American and 40% white. And so in that aspect, we created what we call the Para-to-Teacher program. The PFT, Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers Union, they actually kicked in $1,500 as well. Pittsburgh Public Schools is going to give $1,500 as well. And we partner with 2 universities to begin that program this fall. And the demographics of that, the individual in the program is about 65% African-American, and then the other is white and other. So we have a highly diverse parent-to-teacher training program, and we're intentional about training those teachers and providing them jobs once they graduate. And one of the things we did in the program, we did an RFP, and for different universities for the program, we wanted to look at their curriculum. Did they have culture relevant pedagogy embedded? Did they have these things that we need in our curriculum now and we need in our teaching staff now? They're actually teaching in their classrooms. And so we feel really good about the programs that we have our paraprofessionals in right now. And we're looking forward to them graduating and coming to the teaching ranks of Pittsburgh Public Schools.
Thank you. Thank you. We are going to do a rapid round of final thoughts. And I'm going to start with Auja, if you have any final thoughts before our next panel comes on. And that doesn't mean for everyone to disappear. We're going to continue the conversation. Auja.
I just thought that it was good to talk with everybody. The biggest thing is, yes, we do need more like teachers of color within PPS. I think it's good to have someone who looks like you can relate to better. Yeah, that's just my final thoughts on the situation.
Dr. Cohen.
I would like to end with just reminding people of some simple things. Children are children, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, and deserve to be treated as such and recognized as such. And children have rights, and the United Nations has recognized those rights, and we need to make sure that we as a society are seeing that all children's rights are respected and advocated for. And I think that as we look at how we are treating children at schools, we need to use that as a yardstick. Are we respecting the rights and needs of children? Are we addressing them in a way that helps them to grow up to be whole, healthy human beings who can give back to society? And and all children, regardless of the rich or poor, Black, white, brown, we need to, as a society, come to some agreement that that's is going to be our focus in schools and elsewhere.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Yes, I mean, I just want to go back to the notion that there are things that you can do now. And so we don't have to wait for study after study. There is more stuff that we can learn from additional studies of the data, but there are steps that can be taken now. I mean, this is actually a good time to do some planning because you have empty buildings. You don't have kids in the schools. So the issue is what happens when they walk back into the schools? You think about all that kids have been through in 2020, with the pandemic and the disruption in their lives, the post-George Floyd racial reckoning moment or moments that we are having. I would say that it's an important time to really just kind of take a position and say, well, maybe the last person that a student should see when they actually return to the building is a police officer. So this is a time when you can make those kind of gradual changes and reduce the presence and work on organizing programs and that improve the school environment. And so this new way of doing things is what kids see and experience when they walk into the schools.
Thank you. And Dr. Hamlet.
Thank you, Heather. Definitely echo the sentiments of all of our panelists today. This problem with arrests, citations, and the school to prison pipeline is embedded in Pittsburgh public schools, and we need to eradicate it from Pittsburgh public schools. So we need to work together to make that happen. Having our students come to schools that have positive environments, we look forward to coming to school, they're supported in school and get the resources and mental health supports they need, as well as academic supports and also social supports they need as well, is of the utmost importance for us to make happen. We do know and understand that our data does not look good, and we'll continue to work feverishly to eradicate any arrest, citations, and out-of-school suspensions as much as we can moving forward. And so it's a focus for Pittsburgh Public Schools.
Thank you. And Mr. Jordan mentioned that we can do things now before students return to the classrooms. And one of those things you can do is join the Black Girls Equity Alliance. They're hosting a webinar. It's actually their regular meeting, and it's entitled Integrated but Unequal. And it's a meeting to address the racial achievement gap. There's various work groups, and there's also a work group that's working on juvenile justice issues. So we will share more information about that. But if you go to Gwen's Girls Facebook page, you can register to attend and actually join a work group to continue not only a conversation, but solutions. So I want to thank all of our panelists for taking time out. Thank you, especially Dr. Hamlin. I know, we pound this issue a lot. So thank you for showing up tonight. And thank you to more than 200 participants who decided to have this conversation yet again, because you are dedicated to the well-being and the success of our students. And I will toss this over to Gada.
Thank you. And thank you again to all of our panelists. For right now, we are going to take a break. So we will take about a 5-10 minute break and resume at 7:20. So if everyone wants to stretch, get some water, get something to eat, and join us back here at 7:20 to begin our second panel. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Or see you in 5.
Okay, thank you.
second panel will begin at 7:20.
I think we're ready to get started. Is that what's happening here? All right, welcome back. Welcome back to the second half of the Pittsburgh Racial Justice Town Hall. If you are just joining us, our first panel focused on school policing in Allegheny County and specifically in Pittsburgh public schools. So, wow, policing is something that everyone, and we could see from the chat and the questions, is concerned about. And challenging police crimes aren't anything new. We've been doing this since the era of slavery. So moving from a discussion about policing our children in a school setting, how do we imagine justice that is not based on fear or vengeance, but rather justice that is focused on, the repairing of relationships and community healing? And so what we are now seeing and witnessing locally, nationally, globally are the consequences of the criminalization of poverty, of mental health, of addiction, and so on, by turning prisons into institutions that are incapable of addressing any of these issues. So I'm super excited to welcome our next panelists. This group comes to you from 3 different cities. They come to you from Chicago and Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. But the one identity they share is that of abolitionists. And I personally wanted to bring this subject to this platform today with these particular folks because of their personal experiences with the criminal and justice system. And they have a unique point of view and the ability to help us think about a whole range of creative ways to address problems that prisons presume to address. They are smart, they are fabulous, they are dynamic, and they are so committed. And I hope, for your sake, you have some hydration nearby. So get yourself a tall glass of water because you're gonna need it. Grab your pen, grab your paper, kick back, and let's get ready. And as a reminder, we don't have the chat function for everybody, but what we have is the Q&A. And as questions arise for you, for the panel, or for specific panelists, please place them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So let's welcome Avalon Gaston. Let's welcome Cynthia Alvarado. Let's welcome Miracle Jones and etc.
Thank you, Yvette. Thank you. It's really great to be here virtually with 186 others. I feel nervous and excited and honored. My name is etc. I have lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for 22 years, and I'm coming to you today from collaborating with people who are incarcerated for the last 20 years in Pittsburgh. I co-founded an organization called Let's Get Free, the Women Trans Prisoner Defense Committee. And I'm really excited to host this panel today. And I was thinking, I've been, stewing on abolition and like pouring podcasts and articles and things into my head, thinking about questions. And one thing that was really like relieving for me is to think that we are not experts. And that's part of like what abolition is to me, is that none of us are experts. We're here to bring ourselves into the conversation, to talk about the conversation, to really, envision a new world. So I would love, I'm really, during the break, I uncamered myself and I saw these panelists and I just had that feeling like you get when you see somebody in person, and I just wanted to hug them and say hello and have like pre-panel chatter. But so I'm just really excited to be in conversation, and I know all 3 of you in different ways, and I would love for you just to share who you are a little bit with the group that's gathered here today, and also just briefly share about yourself and because first I'll just say that I met Avalon on an internet email group, the National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And we call it the Council with love and affection. And this organization is my favorite movement in the whole entire country of the United States of America. I love it. And Avalon, I put a notice out on this list, like, hey, does anybody want to study this abolitionist study guide that just came out from the Abolitionist Journal? And Avalon responded. And so actually Yvette, Avalon, and a couple of other people gathered for 6 weeks and studied. So that's how I got to meet Avalon. And so I welcome you, Avalon, if you could just share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Avalon Gaston, and I am formerly incarcerated. I was wrongfully convicted on a federal level, and I served nearly 4 years in federal prison. And I am also a non-licensed attorney as well as an ordained minister. So I bring various lenses to this abolition space. And I am, and it's really cool because all those pieces of me fit nicely on this journey that I'm on right now. And so I'm excited and I'm honored to be a part of this discussion. Again, nobody's an expert. The one thing abolitionists will tell you is that this is a process that we're going to learn and do as we go. We're going to make some mistakes. We're going to have some successes. But at the end of the day, we need to get rid of the system that we currently have because it is not serving our communities and it's not keeping us safe. So thank you for having me, Etta. It's so good to see you again.
Yes. Hugging you. Next, I would love to welcome Cindy Alvarado. So we're new. We're the newest friends of everybody on the panel, and we just became in community, I think, in the last 3 months. But I've known of Cindy for a while, and she actually was in a film that Let's Get Free helped produce just last August. So I saw her in the video before I met her. And I just want, like, Cindy's presence is really precious because the state of Pennsylvania sentenced her to die in prison. And she's been out since February and she's here, and I'm so glad. And yeah, if we were in like a, real life with people, like the crowd would be going wild right now because your freedom is our freedom. So Cindy, welcome. If you could, you're muted, I think. And I'm happy if the panelists want to stay unmuted, you're welcome to.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So hi everyone. Like Etta just said, my name is Cynthia Alvarado. I spent 12 years in a state prison. I was convicted, sentenced to life without parole. Prison is horrible. It was the worst experience of my life. Every day, I was just reminded of how cruel our system is and how, barbaric and how disconnected I was, in that reality until I had to encounter that. I educated myself on the law when I was in prison, and I refused to accept, that reality, life without parole. So I fought back like hell. I spent all the money that I had, fighting my case. I met some amazing women who, have impacted me forever. Some of the same people that Etta know as well. It's hard for me. I'm happy that I'm home, but it's bittersweet because I left a lot of them in there, and I know like what they go through every day. And that's why I'm on this panel today. I am an influencer on Instagram. I talk about my experiences in prison. I make videos about the women I left behind. And, that's what I try to do to help until I'm able to do more. With that being said, I'm super grateful to be here. I respect everybody who does this work in prison. We are very appreciative of people like you. So I just want to say thank you on my behalf, but also, for all of the women that are grateful for your letters, grateful for your love. And, it makes me emotional when I think about them. But just a big thank you to all of you. And that's what I have right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. It dawned on me when you were sharing how you taught yourself legal stuff while you were incarcerated that we have 3 powerhouse lawyers on this panel. This panel is lawyers because the first time I met Miracle, who I'm so proud to be in comradeship with, I just adore Miracle. I admire Miracle. I love listening to Miracle. I'm so glad Miracle's on the panel. But the first time we met, I believe it was at the Toxic Prison Conference outside, and it was me and you and Terrell Johnson. And we connected because we both supported Terrell in his fight against wrongful conviction. He was also sentenced to die in prison and won his freedom after 17 years of wrongful conviction. So that's how I first met Miracle. But then, we've seen each other on the streets, in meetings, on email groups. So welcome, Miracle. Please share anything about yourself that you would like to.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction, Etta. By the way, Etta is like the most fabulous person in Pittsburgh and the best person to you ever, like, if you ever come to Pittsburgh, like, you have to meet Etta. But my name is Miracle Jones. I'm a director of policy and advocacy here at One Hood. So sorry. One of the things that I do with like abolition is, of course, study abolition and feminism. But I became to this work as someone who has had friends and family members incarcerated, and someone who has had to visit people in prisons and jails at all stages of the criminal justice system. And so even though I have not personally served time, I've had loved ones I've had friends who've gone through the system and still be disenfranchised as survivors of violence. And so coming from a survivor's perspective and approaching abolition, I think is like so important. And so that's why I'm here today. So again, thank you all so much for this.
Thanks, Miracle. And I welcome your young person the whole time.
This is my nephew.
You are welcome here. Youth noises are welcome for sure. So I guess I just wanted to start with very general language and thinking about like first of all, this is a historic, if we could just like revel in the historicness of this moment. I mean, at the beginning of COVID and the most, I guess, that most recent upsurge of uprisings, the cries of defunding the police and abolition became household words. Trevor Noah was having panels on it. Trevor Noah was having, and even other mainstream talk shows were having the leaders of Black Lives Matters on their show talking about saying abolition. I couldn't believe it. So I don't want to forget, because things move so fast. They feel like they move so slow, but also so fast. So I don't want to forget that what a precious moment this is, but how a wide conversation this is. And just, can we talk about like, what does abolition mean to you? It feels like it just sits in your mouth, like, and people just say it all the time, and it's like this big idea, but what is it? What is abolition? Avalon, do you want to start?
Sure. So for me, abolition is, I have adopted the phrase from Critical Resistance, who everybody knows is on the forefront of abolition. The phrase that they have coined is dismantle, change, build. And so to me, that's what abolition is. And defund was actually the compromise. So this whole, I guess, this online fighting that's happening with regards to, well, we shouldn't be using the phrase defund the police and things like that. And for those of us that are firmly staked in the abolition position, defund was the compromise. But for me, abolition is to dismantle the current system, change it completely, and build a new system that puts harm reduction at the core of its existence. I am a big believer that, and I'm not going to get too spiritual, but that every seed after its own kind. So if we have an apple tree and we try to feed it strawberry food and try to hope and pray and change it and prune it and do all these things to an apple tree to try to get it to produce strawberries, we're going to always get apples. And the same thing is true with our criminal legal system. It was founded on slave patrols. And when we know that that is the root of the organization, any reform to it cannot change it from its root. That is its core, the core of its existence. And so for me, abolition has to be reimagining what do we need policing? What does it look like if we do need it? Definitely no to prisons. I'm a hard no with regards to reimagining and building prisons. Like, that's a hard no for me. But and then not only that, just the whole process. What does it look like? What do prosecutors, what should they do in this new system? Do they exist in the new system? Public defenders, etc. So I am of the mindset of thinking beyond what we currently have. For so long as a lawyer, all I knew was what we have, and I couldn't imagine anything beyond that. So all of my thoughts and my ideas for reform were rooted in the current system. And what abolition has done for me, it has untethered me from that system and said, just because that's all we know, that doesn't mean that's all there is. And that we need to think beyond what we have and try to see what can we actually get to put in place that will actually keep us safer. And that's my goal, is I want my community safe.
Me too. Me too, Avalon. What about you, Cindy?
When I think about abolition, the first thing that comes to mind is obviously like slavery, right? And being in prison and realizing how many people capitalize from, my oppression, just me being in there, the COs, the counselors, the psychologists, the DAs, the judges, everybody is gaining from prison, right? So, in order to tackle that, you would have to tackle capitalism. And it's such a big monster. And it's a lot of times people, it's hard to take away prisons when everybody's winning, right? So I hate the word reform because I think it just means to change. Change, we don't need to change, we just need to stop it. Prisons don't work, they hurt people. So when I think of, abolition, I'm just thinking about completely just wiping it away, and then we'll deal with later what we're going to replace it with. Because I think a lot of times, when we're talking about, even LWOP, we say, okay, let's take away the death penalty, but let's replace it with LWOP. And I think that's very dangerous when we always want to replace it with something. I think we just need to just completely just wipe it away, and then we'll deal with it later, because it puts us back in a box, and being in a box really sucks. And, what the slaves went through was horrible. So to even compare prisons to it it's worst, because now you have a lot of people that are gaining from it, even ordinary people. So it causes rage and hatred. And, that's just what I think about abolition.
Thank you, Sin.
You're welcome.
What about you, Miracle? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm here. Yes. So when I think of abolition, of course, I think of, like I said, our abolition feminists like Angela Davis, who's taught as, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who talks about how our institutions need to be life affirming. But for me, abolition is a place where prisons and jails do not exist, because people have what they need to survive, and people's resources are freely given, and that we have systems of intervention. We have systems of intervention that prevent violence, that actually take people and help them and heal them. And so that is what abolition is.
Okay, you muted yourself right at the end of your.
Yes, I said that's what abolition means to me, is we create totally new systems and communities and communications where we're actually showing up for each other. Because I don't know anyone who believes in prison, who believes in the system, who will say, if this person goes to prison, they're going to come back better. If this person goes to prison, they are going, prison is going to fix them. I think we all understand that prisons are places of horror, and prisons are places of horror and violence. And so there's no rehabilitation. There is no reforming a system that's meant to deprave.
Thank you, Miracle. Yeah, so I was trying to think of a title for her. I don't know if she has one. Miriam Kaba, who is, I feel like, a mother of the abolitionist movement. She's such a phenomenal teacher, and she's actually leading a workshop tonight titled Abolition, It's About Making Things, Creativity and Organizing. And then I think of Dylan Rodriguez, who is really, really inspiring to me. And he says that abolition is our obligation. It is an ethical obligation. And I like to think about that. And I also, so just to pick apart these words, so I appreciate you sharing that, all your different definitions and thoughts around like what is abolition. Figuring out other ways of keeping us safe, other ways of surviving harm and healing from harm. I'm curious what y'all's definition of justice is.
And okay, so I'll jump in really, really quick. Sorry, I don't want to always lead. So my current definition of justice is change, and I think it's still changing. It's this process of evolution for me. So originally, I thought justice meant the equivalent of an eye for an eye, right? That's how I was trained as a lawyer to think. That's what our system teaches us is justice. Justice is you hurt, we hurt you. You cause harm, we punish you. But then in thinking about it, as a sexual assault survivor, as a prison survivor, I realized like that can't be justice, because how is the person or thing being harmed being healed in that process? So for me, justice is healing. It's healing for the person who was harmed, but more importantly, it's healing for the person who caused the harm. My pastor always says, hurt people hurt people. So if we never get to that initial harm, that untreated trauma that may cause someone to act in a way that society deems inappropriate, if we never address that harm, then we'll never stop the harm from happening. So for me, justice is, again, healing the person who has been harmed, but also healing a person who might have caused the harm, so that everybody gets healed in that process. So I would equate now justice with healing.
Yes. I was thinking of it today as justice is a process. What do Miracle or Cindy, do either of you want to chime in on?
Yeah, I'll go. I think that like justice, to me, it was like just a made up word to just bring like comfort to like families when you're prosecuted. But that's just how I look at it, in the courts. But when I think about it, what it means to me is just understanding and compassion, right? Just understanding like just everything, not just understanding like one side, but let's understand like the person who committed the crime as well. But I think a lot of times people misinterpret justice for revenge. Like you talked about just like, what can I get back if you did this? And I think that just thinking about it like that just takes us down like a really dark back street, and I don't really like the word because I think it's stupid, to be honest. I think it's just a word that, it's just balance. But what are we balancing when we're not really looking at the whole picture, So that's what I feel about justice. But it can be healing if, we get to a healing point. The problem is that not everybody wants to get to that point, So then it's open for interpretation, and we're back down like just another back street.
Yeah, people have different definitions of what people's justices look different. Like justice for me is different than what justice might look like for you. And go ahead, Miracle.
Yeah, when I think about justice, I think about creating the conditions that allow people to heal and recover, and have second chances from whatever actions that we're thinking about. Because a lot of times we talk about abolition and we forget that it's survivors of violence who are the leading abolitionists, right? We forget that most people who survive violent crimes are not going to see justice through our traditional criminal justice system. People are acquitted, cases are dropped due to various issues, due to who we prioritize as needing justice or being deserving of justice, right? So we gotta think about sex workers who are assaulted, people who are queer and trans who are assaulted, who aren't able to seek justice in these traditional forms because they are not seen and valued as human. We gotta think about people who are low income, who may not be able to miss day after work to even go down to a court or show up for a whole week at 8 a.m. So there's so many barriers that people don't understand when we talk about abolition, but also the people who commit harm have to be included in justice, because the majority of people are going to be in our community, in our society. And so we have to create those interventions to figure out what is going on in people's lives and change those, right? I can't sit there and say that for a neighbor that's been forgotten, who don't have access to fresh food, who watch their jobs get taken away, that how they are choosing to survive needs to be met with more state violence and the carceral system. So to me, when I think about justice, to me, it's system changing, but it's creating the conditions that the individuals who are impacted, the communities, the families are all able to heal and to recover.
Yes. That's beautiful vision of healing. I like to imagine those healing circles. I think about, I was thinking about what is justice for me, and I was thinking there, a process that I would believe in would value truth. I feel like our current criminal punishment system does not value truth. They oftentimes discourage you from telling the truth and don't make space for you to tell the truth, because if you don't say exactly what was written on the paper when the court happened 30 years ago, then you are misremembering the truth. So you can't actually say your side of the story if it's written in a certain way when it first happens. I think of space for questionings. I was imagining like a courtroom scenario today where somebody who wasn't one of the lawyers was like asking questions of the, participants. Like, blessed be the questioners. Who gets to question? And even just like for the people to tell their stories, unrestricted storytelling, which I feel like is more, in the restorative justice and transformative justice processes, there is a lot of listening and storytelling and things like this. I'm sort of going off on a little tangent there. I really want to, before I go too much into like what other processes could look like and what is everyday abolition, I'm curious about this tension in the movement around cases of police brutality. When Avalon and I were in the study group, we talked a lot about Breonna Taylor's case specifically, And I actually put together a resource guide for this panel that has a whole bunch of resources, and the article that Avalon and I read together will be listed in there. And the article is called "We Want More Justice for Breonna Taylor Than the System That Killed Her Can Deliver." And again, that it was in Essence magazine and written by Miriam Kaba and Andrea Ritchie. So talk about that tension, Avalon, of like, you're an abolitionist, we don't believe in the system. This horrific scenario of police violence happens. Horrific. Breonna Taylor murdered while she was asleep. The community is calling for, you know, jail the cops. What's your response to that, Avalon?
And it makes me sad a little, two ways. It makes me horrified that this woman is murdered in her own home. But it makes me sad because the community is rallying around the prosecution of these officers because that's all they can imagine. That's all they know. They can't see justice in any other way or take form in any other way because they have been indoctrinated to see justice through this single lens. And that actually makes me a little bit sad because justice is so much bigger than that. If we're going to really give it its true definition, it's much bigger than the system. And as she said, that she deserves the justice that the system can never give her. Because let's just break this down. The prosecutor, even if they were to prosecute these cops, her family will have zero input as to what the punishment looks like. Because you have sentencing guidelines, you have statutes in place that dictates the outcome of that proceeding. So they don't even have a say so as to, okay, what is it that what would that justice look like for us? What would make us feel better? And so our default becomes, well, we'll just whatever the system gives us, whatever outcome the system gives us, that's what we'll take because that's all we can get. The prosecutors, their voice is going to be silent in that courtroom, although the prosecutors will gladly say that they're doing this on behalf of the victim and the victim's family, but their voices aren't centered in that process in any way, shape, or form. The voice of the defendant is not going to be centered in that courtroom, not even with their prosecutor, with their public defender or their private attorney that's defending them. Their voice will not be centered in that process. They will tell them what to say, when to say it, how to say it, or to say it at all. So their voice is not centered. So the two parties, so-called parties to this proceeding, their voices are silent. They cannot be heard. They have zero input. And so that is why Breonna's family, although they're asking for this, your voice is not going to be centered. They don't care what you really, really want, what will really make you feel better about this situation. They're not going to ask you for your input. You may not even be involved. So it can't be justice for you and your family because you're not actually going to be a part of this process. And in order for you to really get justice out of a process, you have to be integral to it. It's impossible for it to happen, for you to get justice in a process that takes place apart from you. And that's what I would love to tell them. And I know that's not what they want to hear because they're hurt right now, but that's why you're not going to be a part of this process. So you're not going to get justice. But let's think of a way for you to be centered in this process so that you can get justice. And that is something this system can't give you.
Thanks, Avalon. Miracle, I just saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I think for me, the call to arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor is basically a call to tell the system to value Black lives that you claim that you're fighting for, right? If Black people matter in your system, and if your system of justice is we go to this prosecution, then you're going to treat these officers like you treat everybody else, right? So for me, I view it as holding up a mirror, shining the light, and explaining to people these we're trying to arrest these cops because they're not going to get arrested. The maximum time they may get is like 2 years, right? So if we know this is the system that we're working with, why not engage in transformative justice? Why not imagine what justice for this family is going to look like? Because Breonna Taylor can never get justice because she's no longer here, right? Taylor was that she would have never had her apartment shut up. She would have never been under state surveillance, and she would have never even had a warrant with her name on it, right? So for a lot of, I think, abolitionists, they see these cops, these calls to arrest the cops as a means of organizing and engaging, because this is the first time that people are going, for some people, they're going to experience a unjust or unjust system, or a system that is meant to reinforce white supremacy. This is the first time that they're engaging. Even here in Pittsburgh, when the decision came down that said the murderer of Antoine Rose was not going to be convicted, a lot of people said, I never could have imagined this. I never would have thought, right? And so what abolition's, our job is to actually take these people and introduce them to abolition and talk about, well, what would you like to see? What were the conversations going to need to be had? I talk a lot of times about like, what would it have looked like if George Zimmerman went through a transformative justice process, right? Would he be out here beating people, shooting people, day in and day out, disrespecting the memory of Trayvon Martin? Would there have been other people who wouldn't have been emboldened right now to commit acts of hate and violence if he had been engaged back then? And so for me, I don't see a problem with these calls, because to me, I see an opportunity to engage people about abolition, because this is the time when people are seeing the system of white supremacy being reinforced, and watching quote unquote justice being sliced and carved and handpicked for folks, because there's no reason that Breonna Taylor, who killed Breonna Taylor, aren't being indicted, but the officer who shot Diamond in Minneapolis got arrested, convicted, charged within a matter of months. So if we're looking at this imbalance, I see it as a way to bring people into the abolition fold and to expound upon what justice could be in our system.
Curious. I'm so curious if there's ever been any transformative or restorative justice process in a scenario of police violence. I've never heard of one. And when I think of restorative justice practices, they're not always, oftentimes we'll hear of them as like diversion programs from the criminal punishment system, like youth offender, first time offender, they'll go to another program outside of that. But it could also be like totally outside of the system, where it's a circle where people are coming together to hear each other's side, maybe a long time after a scenario of violence has happened. Yeah, so now I'm sort of thinking about different processes. I just crossed my mind in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if you have heard of this program, or I don't know, Cynthia, if you have on the inside. So the Office of the Victim Advocate is a institution within the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, and they offer this program that is I think it's called the Victim Offender Dialogue Program, and it is instigated by the survivor of violence. I'm choosing the word survivor there, but people should be able to choose their own language, of course. And so this is specifically for people in Pennsylvania prisons. The person who harmed the other person is still in the prison. Their survivor wants to communicate them. They contact this organization. And then through volunteers and years, it often takes years for this meeting to happen, they will come together and have a dialogue process. And it doesn't impact the court sentence or anything like that. It's to have the party communicate, have a chance to communicate with each other, ask questions of each other. And Cynthia, did you hear about that program when you were incarcerated?
I heard of the program, but I heard of it in other states, such as California. When I was in there, we weren't allowed to reach out to our victims at all. It's just something you just didn't do. And then, they came up with like a bank where you could write a letter. And if they decided to write back, the victim advocates, Jennifer Storm would, make that type of determination. But no, but I would like to talk about Breonna Taylor and the police and all of that. So as I was hearing everybody talk, I know the system because I've encountered the system. So I don't expect much from the system. So I don't really engage in that type of thinking because I don't want to waste my energy, right? So what I was thinking was a racial episteme, right? How the same way, if you look at the Rodney King case, they let the cops off because they viewed Rodney King as being dangerous, a dangerous Black man, right? And obviously that stems from, the racism in our country, the paranoia that they feel, the guilt and the shame has them living on edge, for whatever was done through their ancestors, X, Y, and Z. So if I had to say, justice for Breonna Taylor for me would look like, viewing Black people and not looking at them in a dangerous lens, because we're going to keep dealing with the police are going to keep getting off and people are going to just keep getting off because, oh, I thought, he was going to rob me, or I thought she was doing something wrong. So I think viewing, really looking at the racial episteme and saying, listen, that Black guy is not dangerous. Breonna Taylor is not dangerous because she's Black. Is really, how we really could start justice for her, because then it brings us into a whole systemic change in how we think, right? Like the way we think determines how we feel, and how we feel obviously determines, a lot of times on how we act. So I'm just a big person. And when I think about, justice, I always try to think about how can we just change another person's mind, right? And I know, like for me, growing up in North Philadelphia, I had a lot of Black friends, and even though at times I was robbed by Black people, I still had to come to the point and say, not every Black person is dangerous, but as a human, you feel those implicit biases, and, those are things I had to work on when I was in prison. And I had to say, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I think a person has to be honest with themselves when addressing, implicit biases that, one feels, and then, saying, I'm not going to be afraid when I walk near a Black guy. I'm just not going to let myself go there. And I think that that's how we start to see justice for Breonna Taylor. And, it's horrible what happened to her. And I already know her family's not going to get the justice that, a white person would get, if their child was killed. So I don't really try to spend so much time thinking about that, because it's like you're going to be let down, it's like you're facing a giant. But I did hear about a peace circle when I was in prison, that we did this college course, and it was like it was kind of like restorative justice, where like, you sit in a circle with the person who robbed you, and you had a chance to say, listen, you wronged me, and I don't appreciate what you did. And there started like a dialogue, whatever. But in Pennsylvania, I mean, I haven't heard of it. I think talking is always a good thing, and then understanding and really have active listening is another. But that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Sin. Mm-hmm. So I think we have about like five or so more minutes of us talking, and then we're going to answer some. I see some people have already asked some questions in the question answer function on the Zoom. I'm curious, like, okay, abolition is like the long haul. We will not live to see my vision. you will not live to see my imagination. So like, how do we, it's not like we don't believe in this system, we have a different ideology, like it's gonna happen tomorrow. It's definitely like super, we're in it for the long haul. So how does that translate to like your life right now? Like what do you do in your life that you think is working towards abolition, whether that's like in a workplace scenario, in your personal life scenario, or greater? Just how are you trying to realize abolition?
Well, not to be political, but I will say this last administration showed us that things can change immediately and rapidly if we work to make it happen. A lot of things that we were told couldn't happen, we saw just happen before our very eyes. So I would push back on the idea that we may not see abolition in our lifetime. I jokingly said that the leader of our country is an abolitionist because he's freed all of his friends. And so I know people don't like to hear that. But I'm like, listen, it's true. And he's making sure his people don't get locked up. So like, he's an abolitionist. But what I will say, I do small and large things. So one thing working on is identifying our organization as an abolitionist-based organization. So creating conflict resolution procedures and stuff within our organization. So that's something, I guess, small and personal. But on a larger scale, we're working on with the Alliance of Police Accountability and some other organizations working on creating systems of intervention so that people do not call the cops when when things happen to them, so that we actually implement that we keep us safe and we are all we need strategies. And on a other level is working to educate prosecutors, public defenders, judges about various things within the system and things that they could be doing. So asking people to do community service in lieu of prosecution whenever possible, asking for cases to be resolved at the magistrate level and not being referred up to what we call big court, and pushing for different abolitionist-based legislation. So of course, legalizing marijuana, which we know is a huge reason why a lot of people encounter the criminal justice system to begin with. Putting more social workers, culturally competent social workers and therapists within schools. So we know that that is a necessary system of intervention that will identify needs that are not being met within children's lives so they can be helped. So they're not turning to crime or being victimized, and creating more coalitions that are multicultural so that we understand how systems of oppression impact us differently. Because one thing with abolition, it's not going to look the same for all of us because we are impacted differently, right? Even though it's the same system, it shows up in our lives in different forms or functions. And so for us, it's also about building relationships with people from different communities and different backgrounds so that they also have a seat to imagine and dream with us. And lastly, I will say that I came to abolition because I lost a bunch of people within a short amount of time, one to unnatural causes, one to violence, and one to a car accident. And having that compounded grief made me realize that what we talk about with violence and getting justice, sometimes when incidents happen, there is no one to blame, right? There is no one to point the finger at. There is no one to rage and get yelled at, but we still need that healing. You still need that process. And so for me, that's how I approach abolition, is understanding that what we're going through is like a system that has been created by people, and that as people, we can dismantle it and show up for each other and help to heal and transform each other.
Yay. Miracle, thank you so much for the reminder that we can taste abolition. Because I remember when COVID first hit, I was like, if capitalism can be interrupted this fast, we can do anything. Like, so thanks for that reminder. Cindy, I'm gonna go to you next. Do you have a response?
Of course, I'm so excited to respond. So basically, how I address abolition is with love, with peace, with understanding, right? What I do on Instagram, or even like with some of my followers that I actually get to meet in person, I try to change their mind on how they look at punishment. I try to change their minds on having them understand, what the person went through that led them to prison, right? Because if I could change one person's mind, then they could change another person's mind. And if they could change another person's mind, then we start looking at each other in not in such a dangerous light. And then what happens is you have less people that are headed to prison. You have less people that are quick to prosecute, less people that are quick to judge. I just did a story on Lisa Montgomery, who right now is on death row. They set her execution date. And my video was basically saying how messed up Lisa's life was. And one of my followers was like, well, what did Lisa do? And I'm like, I don't care what Lisa done. What I care is what we're going to do to Lisa. Because it's like, I don't want to engage on what she did, because now we're like on a whole nother, we're on a whole dangerous slope now, and I think like stopping the amount of people that are headed to prison is what I want to do. And it is, if I'm scaring people to death with the laws or letting them know how easy it is to get to prison and how hard it is to get out, then I know that I can make a change, because I know our system is a monster. And they're going to keep arresting people. They're going to keep prosecuting because they want money and they want to keep perpetuating this hate. So I'm going to combat it with love, with peace and understanding for people like Lisa Montgomery, with forgiveness, and by me showing that I'm not going to be quick to judge somebody else. Because I know, how dark my life was as a child and how I ended up in prison with just unaddressed trauma. So who am I to just judge and keep perpetuating the same system? So I just feel like we cannot be hypocrites. We could still address everything with love and with peace and with understanding, because it combats, just evilness. And that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yes, making me smile. Listening to you is making me smile.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sim. All right, Avalon, bring us home.
So being a policy wonk, a minister, and all of that. So I'm all of these different hats. I am chipping away from a policy perspective of the current system, because I feel like we have to chip pieces of it away. And the way to do that is to change the laws, right? So we're going to have to change laws in this interim space, because I want to take this system down piece by piece. I don't want them to see me coming. So that's one thing. So that's one thing. I actually have drafted legislation. I'm on a federal, state level to try to change processes. I'm drafting, doing that piece. So I'm working on the policy end of it. And I think that if I can stem the tide going into prison system, like Cindy said, is like, okay, let's stop how many people are coming into prison. Like let's slow that process down. And the way to do that is to change the law. So we have to work within the confines of the system that we're given. And then the other part is constantly educating myself. Like Cindy was saying, it's like to teach myself to constantly respond in a way that's loving, that's kind, that's understanding, and that's forgiving, because you never know whose shoes you could have been in. You never know whose shoes you could be walking in. And so it is important for us to walk in grace that we give to others. Like that to me is critical. So for me, that's an everyday thing, because I find myself wanting to default back to my norm, which is the current system. And I have to challenge myself mentally to say, that's not good enough. And don't just settle for that. And then lastly is, just to speak my truth, to speak my truth in spaces like this, in private spaces. At work, we have a situation with a young man who has suffered some tremendous trauma. And we are trying to do some restorative justice in that particular situation. And just trying to get at the root at, okay, well, what's going on? Why are these young men killing each other? Like, why are they, and not just killing each other, they're killing family members. They are just mowing people down. Like, what's behind that? What is going on? And if we don't deal with that part of it, we can't even decide what we need to help fix it, right? So just educating myself and being a part of that process, learning, listening, because I don't know, I can empathize with Cindy, but if I hear her story, now she and I can work together to say, okay, how can we work to change it so that the next Cindy doesn't happen? Like the next unresolved trauma, that we don't have someone like Cindy who had unresolved trauma, or like me, or like the tens of millions of people who walk around with unresolved trauma. Like, let's deal with that and let's listen and learn from each other so that we can start to mold and create this system, because we can't use the system we have now. That's why we got to kind of dismantle it. Like, I'm chipping away at it, and we start to on the side to build and mold this new system that actually does, again, keep us safe.
Thanks, Avalon. Thank you, everyone. So we have about 15 minutes left, or a little bit less, and I'm looking at the questions. And I just want to invite Gada or Yvette or one of our awesome summit hosts, if you could please post the resource list I created in the chat for people whenever before the end, I'd appreciate it. It has a ton of resources, and I just wanted to share locally, there's an organization called Just Mediation Pittsburgh, which is really new. And they're specifically working right now to mediate cases between tenants and landlords. And they're doing a training in January. And I believe the training is free. You do have to apply for it. There's a limited number of spaces, but I was lucky enough to take the training, and it's really great. And the organization is really cool. So they're called Just Mediation Pittsburgh, and they're pretty new. So I just wanted to share that. And looking for a question. So here's one from Thea Young, who is a stalwart summit longtime worker for the Racial Justice Summit. She asks, under abolition, how are people who are targets of domestic violence and intimate partner violence protected and served? There is no justification for telling them that they need to accept the violence or any system that doesn't fully protect them. Does anyone have a response to Thea?
Yeah, I would say number one, if you know anyone who served a victim of domestic violence, Men's Stopping Violence runs a offender program that's what it's called, that really helps to do interventions with people who commit domestic violence. But I would say no one should ever tell a person that the system just doesn't protect them and therefore they should undergo violence. It's as like abolition is based upon accountability. It's not like, oh, you just keep doing this violent thing that you do and no. So for under those systems, the first thing is making sure people are safe. So separating out the individuals with intimate partner violence, and getting the offender the help that they need, the abuser the help that they need, and then creating systems and conditions that may possibly allow people to come back together if they so choose, right? As well as prioritizing the health and safety and support of the person who has been harmed. For some places, there are houses where in various parts of the country, one of the ways they do it is they have houses where people who are feeling like triggered that they're going to commit violence or are committing acts of violence where they're put out, right? So there's community housing centers where that person goes and is removed from that family. We have to remember that with intimate partner violence, a lot of times it's the main breadwinner who is committing harm. And so incarcerating that person actually creates compounding actually family, that homelessness, all type of various issues. And so if anyone is saying that a person who is in a violent relationship has to stay there or they're not an abolitionist, that is flat out wrong. What we are about is abolition. Again, it is systems of intervention and showing up. There have been times where I have let people stay in my house. There have been times where I've shown up and mediated and talked people down for situations. So there is accountability. You have to be responsible for your actions and you have to stop committing harm. But we don't believe that the police and the prison system is the means and ways to do that.
Thanks,
Right.
Mary.
And I just want to piggyback on that, because that's one of the biggest arguments or pushback that abolitionists get, is that, well, what about the person who's been raped, or what about the person who, those type of things, or domestic violence. And it is definitely not the position of any abolitionist that I know of, that I've learned from, that I interact with, that would say that someone's in a violent situation or a harmful situation for them to stay in that situation. It is definitely the goal. Harm reduction is our number one goal. And that means all the way around. So if someone is being abused in whatever form that might take place, of course, we would want to have them come out of that situation and be put in a safe environment. But what we're saying is that the response after that is where we go wrong as a society, by then putting them through this system, prosecuting them and putting them through this carceral system. We're saying that does not help that situation. And as Miracle said, typically it's the breadwinner. So now you put this person in prison, they're no longer earning income to even support the family. And then that prison, I can tell you, prison does not rehab people. Let me repeat that. Prison does not rehab people. People rehabilitate people. So that process can take place apart and separate from the prison system. So and that's what we're saying, is that person needs help, but it doesn't need the help of a prison, because the prison will not help them be better. It'll just take them out. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. It's not going to actually heal the wound. It's just going to stem a little bit of the flow of blood. And so we want to heal the wound, not just stem a little bit of the flow of the blood.
Thank you, Avalon. Okay, Cindy, I see you want to respond to, and we have a
Yeah.
bunch more questions.
Yeah, just real quick. I just want to say that as a person, I was sexually assaulted in prison by a guard, and I got no type of legal recourse because the statute of limitation doesn't allow it. And I still stand as being an abolitionist because I understand that prison will not help that guard, because I know that it's only going to perpetuate rage and hate the same way it made me feel inside. Now, it would be interesting to understand, why the guard did that. What type of system that he's working for that doesn't hold him accountable. That's like a whole different type of conversation. As an abolitionist, I don't support crimes or violence against anyone. Do I believe that they should be accountable? Absolutely. But there is another way that you could triage a problem before having to just, give somebody prison. Prison doesn't work. Prison is horrible. It's a place that just commits violence after violence, and then they get away with it. And so basically no harm towards people, but prison doesn't work. And, finding a line in the middle where we could agree, whether it's, medical treatment for that guard, understanding why do you feel like you could do that to a woman? What happened to you as a child? You know what I mean? Just back to everything that we stand for with compassion and understanding. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So here's a question from Catherine Hayashi. Does prison abolition also translate to ending involuntary confinement in behavioral health institutions? You're giving a big nod, Avalon.
Yes, it has to, because, okay, if the process is to heal, And I know we all had kind of like variations of what that actually means. But if the process is to heal, I can't heal you in that type of environment. We need to have you be a full participant in this healing process. And in order for that to happen, we need your buy-in. So anything that's done involuntarily is not going to get that person's buy-in. You're going to just get pushback, or they're going to shut down and things like that. So we need their buy-in. Now, again, like we said before, are there times when the person needs to be removed from the situation? Absolutely. And no one is saying that. We do not want anyone to be harmed. Harm reduction is our first and primary goal from beginning to end. It's just of what the response looked like. And so you have to have their cooperation and their buy-in. And the way you get that is by it being a voluntary process. And that's just in my experience and in my opinion.
Yeah, and we have to understand that we have, not we as us, but the system has expanded what the conditions for involuntary confinement are, right? And so now what they are doing for some people is saying, you know what, you committed a sex crime, we don't want you back, so we're going to involuntarily hold you. You have a chronic mental illness, so we're going to involuntarily hold you. You are someone who is physically disabled, we're going to chronically involuntarily hold you. And so we have to understand we can't hold people against their will, right? And we have to get away from this either or, like either we put them in jail or like we have a public safety nightmare. We're like, no, like there are systems, there are community homes, there are different things that we could be utilizing to help people and keep them safe. And that's what we're advocating for. But disability, and that falls under disability justice if you're trying to get more information about how you can engage in that.
Thanks, Miracle. I wanted to share a story that I was told in my conversations about transformative justice. I was told that there was a community in Mexico City that had in their network who had someone who molested children, someone who abused children was in their network. And in order to keep their community safe, they decided that this person could never be alone. That's how they dealt with that problem. They were like, this person cannot be alone. So they didn't isolate that person. They didn't put them in a room somewhere in an isolated place. They were like, no, our community has to come together and make sure that this person, because the person was apparently functional and okay when they were with other people. It was just they could not be alone, especially with children. So I think that what a different way of thinking about who we're responsible to and how we can deal with problems and how we can keep each other safe. And it's coming to the end of our time. We have just 1 minute left, and I wanted to thank each of you. I love you. I adore you. I appreciate you. I learned from you. And I wanted to end with this person named Autumn Walsh. Cindy, I don't know if you saw the comment in the question and answer, but they are so happy. They say, Cindy, I'm so happy you are home. When the director of my SW program, social work program, sent me this knowing I would be interested and I saw your name, I cried. Tears of joy. I'd love to speak with you if possible. I cannot send this privately, but I just wanted to.
Can I say something back to them?
Yeah.
Wow, it's crazy that you say that, but I was just reading one of my followers left me a comment about wanting to just give up and quit, and my story, the family was like, read about her story, and they were just thanking me. So thank you so much. It's very inspiring that my story was able to touch you. But Etta, I don't know how I could give them my information. I don't know if maybe like you can make that possible.
Somebody posted your Instagram in the chat.
Oh, okay, good. I am not very advanced with like the technology with the Zoom yet. So I just want to get on, but I don't know how to type or like answer anything. So I'm like new to all of this, but thank you so much. You almost made me cry. There was plenty of nights that I wanted to just honestly just give up and end my life in prison. Like, I have to just be honest, but I just had to keep fighting and pushing, because tomorrow could always change. Tomorrow could always be a better day. And sometimes we don't see that day. We don't see that day and we just want to give up. But my message to all of you people that are listening is never give up, because tomorrow could be a better day. I literally won my appeal on my last appeal. I kicked the last door. Had I given up, I would have never known, but thank you so much for everybody who's, touched by my story. I love you guys. And thank you for having me on here with all of you beautiful ladies, Etta. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And Yvette, I believe, is coming back to.
Yeah.
Yes. My God, I think minds are blown and hearts are open. Thank you. Thank you, Miracle. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Avalon. Thank you to our ASL interpreters and et cetera, my girl. Now, I do have a few announcements. We have to make announcements here. And the first one I think I need to bring to your attention is that we need to know how we did. And so there will be a browser there'll be a link that shows up in your browser at some point. I don't know how that happens, but that is what they told me to say. So when you see that link that shows up in your browser, then please fill out the survey. We'd really appreciate it. And so I just want to say there are 112 people still hanging in here at 8:32 at night. And I'm sure more than half of the people have Zoom fatigue, because we are tired of being on screen, but this is also speaks to the importance of what you all are talking about. And thank you for creating such a big container to hold it all. So the summit, the town hall, is a precursor to the Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit. And the Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit is in its 23rd year. And as a reminder, it was created in response to the murder of Johnny Gamage, who was murdered by police here in southwestern Pennsylvania 25 years ago on October 12, 1995. And not much has changed. I also need to say, too, that the Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit is an initiative of the Black and White Reunion. And it started at that time with just a handful of people. And over time, we have continued to grow as a mostly volunteer organization. So I need you to mark your calendars for January 22nd and 23rd. And for the past, I don't know, however many years I've been involved, I call on Miracle, I call on Etta, I call on all the people to say, please share your information, because nobody can do it like y'all. And so I want you to know, too, that registration opens next week for the summit. So I'll put the link in, if someone hasn't, to the website, and you can just be kept abreast of everything that we have planned for you this year. I want to thank both of our panels, all of our panelists, for your time and for your love and for your energy and for your education. Thank you. And thank you to our interpreters. Good night.
Night. Thank you.
Be well.
Y'all are amazing.
Y'all are awesome.
I just realized that January 23rd is